Welcome to the Get to Know Memphis First United Methodist podcast. I am your host, Thomas First, and I will be interviewing people from our congregation so that through great stories, laughter, and tales of the experience of the God who is an active agent in our world, we can get to know one another. Welcome to the Get to Know Memphis First United Methodist podcast. I am super excited about our episode today. I am Tom First. I'm the pastor at Memphis First United Methodist, and I am here with my friend Tim Flack, and I am excited. Tim, people cannot see you wave, buddy.
Uh-oh, okay. Well, I just waved to everyone.
I love it. I love it. Tim, it will
Yeah,
not be on a video recording. This will be all on audio. So unfortunately, they also don't get to see what beautiful men we are.
that's right. Yeah. I swear I'm wearing a golf shirt. I'm not in my pajamas right now. So yeah, I dressed up for it, but hey, you know.
Tim is actually, I can see he's wearing his Le Bonheur shirt. He works at Le
Yeah.
Bonheur. Tim, what do you do at Le Bonheur?
So I'm actually an attorney. I'm not a physician, but I work with one of our community-based programs. We have over 40 different programs that work out in the community dealing with all sorts of issues. We like to say at Le Bonheur, we treat kids both inside and outside the walls of the hospital. So everything from helping kids with therapy, pregnant moms having a more healthy pregnancy, and then the program that I work on, we provide free, we're called Memphis Child, and we provide free legal representation to families who have kids who are patients at Le Bonheur who have civil legal issues that impact their kids' health. So we
Wow.
do all kinds of stuff, but the bulk of my practice is helping kids get on SSI, or what a lot of people refer to as disability for kids. So yeah, that's my day
Wow.
job. Yeah.
That's
Yep.
amazing, man. That's
Mhm.
amazing. I think the
Yeah.
first time I met you actually was at Le Bonheur. Jennifer Paris was working there,
Yes.
and she
Yep.
invited me and maybe a couple others to do a tour. And I think you were a
hmm
part of that tour.
Yes, that was part of the tour. Yeah, that's the other, I say, the big part of our story, the Flack story, is that our oldest daughter, Madeline, who is now 20, had open heart surgery at Le Bonheur, and really, Le Bonheur saved her life when she was about 10 months old. So as a result of that, Bridget and I became big time volunteers at Le Bonheur, and I ended up volunteering myself into a job. So it's a very, very special place to the Flack
Changed
family.
your life,
Sure.
man.
Yep.
Sounds like.
Yep.
That's
Exactly. Yep.
incredible.
Yep.
So Tim, you and I have talked over the years about different things, and just since this podcast is really about other folks getting to know you, and of course, I always learn things about people interviewing them. But I'm wondering, I know from our conversations over the years that like you grew up going to church. Is that right?
Oh, yes. Yes. Grew up
Yeah.
going to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, sometimes on Thursday night. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Very
it was like a fundamentalist church, right? Like was it like a Bible church or something?
Yeah. So it was. There are not many of them in the Memphis area. I grew up outside Nashville. There's quite a few of them in Middle Tennessee. They like to refer to themselves back then as independent, fundamentalist, KJV, premillennial Baptist. So in their worldview, it's interesting. Almost as if that form of a Baptist church was the true church. And the reason they called themselves Baptist is because John the Baptist was the precursor of the church. And in their way of thinking, the next level down of people that might go to heaven would be Southern Baptist, but they had some real issues with them around having international mission boards and some other stuff. And then, of course, Methodists certainly were going to hell. Catholics were, really going to
The
hell. And
worst.
yeah,
Yeah.
the worst of the worst. So, yeah, yeah. So that's
Yeah,
the
so
environment I
I
grew up
I
in.
also grew
Mhm.
I didn't grow up going to church, but when I started going to church in high school, that was the kind of church I went to in Central Missouri. And yeah, absolutely like we are the pure church of God on earth. The King James Bible is the pure Bible version.
Mhm.
So obviously, like attending a Methodist church, I mean, you haven't gone full on heresy like Catholicism or something, but you've come a pretty long way to being in
Mhm.
the Methodist church. So I want to get that story as we talk. But
Mhm. Sure.
if you were to think back, okay, growing up in that environment, who was the first person to create a memory of God for you? And that doesn't even have to be like a good memory, like just,
Mhm.
somebody who shaped your earliest
Mhm.
understanding of who God is or what God's like.
Right. I would definitely say that it's my parents, but primarily my dad.
Mm,
Interestingly enough, my dad was grew up in a small town here in West Tennessee, in Brownsville, Tennessee. Grew up in a Methodist church. Now, his mother, my grandmother Flack, as we called her, used to like to say, I'm an old-timey Methodist. I'm not like these new ones, these liberal ones. I'm a holiness Methodist. But he grew up in that environment, I think, like a lot of kids. I mean, church was, went off to college, kind of got out of it. And then, when I was a little kid, up until I was about 4 years old, I have memories of going to the Methodist Church in Hendersonville, Tennessee, but not often. But he had a really, the pastor of the Independent Baptist Church was what those folks did back in the 70s was canvassing, just going around knocking on doors in our neighborhood, sharing the gospel with folks. And my dad had this dramatic conversion experience in our living room. And from that point on, he was very much like a new convert to any sort of thing. He was just all in. And
yeah,
my dad was like that about a lot of things. And so the ideas of God being in a sense like a gracious God, but gracious once you get everything right and you have the right system. So in the other part of my story is not only did I grow up in this church, but this church also started a small private school
as they
that I
did in the
went to from,
70s. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
from like second grade until we moved when I was in the 10th grade to Jackson, Tennessee, and that really my dad and the pastor and the teachers in that school were really the people that gave me this imprint that though I didn't understand at the time that God is somehow this guy upstairs that
Mhm.
has this log book and rule book and he's constantly checking to make sure you got your thoughts right, you got your heart right, you got your thinking right, reading the Bible right, So that was my impression of God
He's
from
making a list and checking it
checking it
twice.
twice. Exactly. And
Yeah.
not as nice as Santa, for sure.
Yeah.
They both have
Yeah.
a white beard, but yeah.
Right, but like honestly, like the more I've thought about that kind of theology over the years, it really does seem like an angry version of Santa Claus,
Mhm. Oh,
like
very much
about moral
so.
conformity
Hmm.
until it comes to enemies, and then enemies are like the moral thing is to sort of end them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I think that's a great description because on the other side of it, it turns God into this great cosmic Santa that if you do the right things, you say the right things, then God will reward you with gifts, And
yeah.
so, yeah, and it is not until, and we'll get to this, very recently that I begun to understand those concepts and how they have, affected me to the point that, yeah, I've had to go through therapy and
Yeah.
deconstruct from those
Yeah.
ideas of what God is. Yeah.
So, yeah, in your childhood, or no, I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be childhood, especially
Mhm.
because you're talking about, how a lot of this has revolved more recently, evolved more
Mhm.
recently. What do you think was like the event that sort of helped jar you out of that kind of angry Santa Claus kind of theology?
If we had 3 hours, we could go through, the iterations of fundamentalism that I went through in high school and through college, including about a 10-year stint in, going to Church of Christ for one thing.
Hmm.
But probably I would say about 5 years after Bridget and I got married in 1998, I think I had a crisis of faith because when I was growing up in the 70s in that fundamentalist environment, they were very, very proud that they separated themselves from politics and the government.
Uh,
Their concern was on the kingdom of God on earth.
They were separatists, right? Like that's the
separatists, right?
language. Yep.
And within the past 20 to 25 years, those folks that taught me that as a kid now have come to fully embrace being a part of the government and those kind of things. So I had a crisis there, and I was like, I need to find something where I used to use the term where I can still be orthodox and true to what I thought was true, staying true as a Christian, but not being caught up in Republican politics because that's what it was.
Right.
Uh, in things that I didn't agree with. So that kind of led me on a journey. I read a lot of stuff by Tim Keller, and I felt like I'd found, okay, so these are, evangelical people who, are Orthodox, the term I used to
Mhm.
use back then, who still take the Bible seriously, but they're, kind of not off somewhere that I thought was terrible.
Tim Keller is often a first step for a
Yes.
fundamentalist who wants to be
Right.
serious
Right.
about their faith but doesn't want to be a fundamentalist.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that led us to some other churches. And, throughout that time, I began to become more and more because the churches we landed in, one of the issues was that they, in spite of some of the strides that I saw from my perspective then, they still did things like women weren't allowed to be elders or pastors. And as a dad of two daughters, that bothered me a lot.
Yeah.
But what I do about that. And
That's
then,
usually the thing that gets the people
right,
from Tim Keller to something else is the realization
right,
that, yeah,
right.
there's still this patriarchy at work in Tim Keller's movement. Yeah.
Right. And I will say, growing up, the message I did get was that God is love. It seems like a contorted message now, the way it was taught to me, but I really did, I think, believe that and still do in my core. And so then with our, gay, lesbian, trans friends, I just became so, and Bridget too, increasingly uncomfortable with this idea that we're supposed to love those people, but they're not really part of the church. And that then led me to thinking about all kinds of things. Like, is God really a person that says, I love everybody, but also he's up there in heaven, like deciding who's not going to go?
Yep.
And that really led me with probably in the past 3 years to really do some deconstruction both around what I thought about Christianity, the Bible. It's about the time that we landed at First. And yeah, it really, I would say it really just sort of shook the foundations of everything that I was. And it was petrifying too, because when you grow up like you do, like I did, to question like, oh, well, is every single word in this version of the Bible that I have, is it absolutely true? Could there be an error here? Could gay
Right.
people and lesbians go to heaven? Is that possible?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, and
Dude, the end of
that's where
my
we
King
landed.
James
Yeah.
only, the end of my
Hmm.
King James onlyism was the first month of taking New Testament Greek.
Hmm. Right.
Because the basics you learn in New Testament Greek are really the basics you learn in any language. Like no
Hmm.
person who speaks a second language should ever be King James only because they realize that's just not how language works.
Right.
Yeah, so like it sounds like you just like started asking some questions that were
Mhm.
foundational to your identity as a fundamentalist or identity as a evangelical and it sort of began to
Exactly.
deconstruct thing on its own,
Exactly.
really.
Exactly. And where I finally landed and where I still am today, and it took a long time to get to this place, is I'm okay with not having all the answers.
Yeah.
And if you didn't grow up in a fundamentalist environment, it's hard to get your mind around how big that of a step that is and how
Yeah.
big of a reality that is to sit in and to say that, I believe in God, I'm a Christian, I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
The other thing that I landed, I tell Bridget this is, when I was growing up, they would talk about how at the end time, everybody be up in heaven and there'd be this big movie screen and God would
Oh,
show everything you'd ever done in your life.
yeah.
And I don't think that's the case, but I've said, if that is the case, if I go to hell, I'd rather go to hell for, committing the sin of loving too much than
Right.
committing the sin of sitting around and saying, well, this person is not right, this person isn't right. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah,
I, I,
that's what
I
I would like
think
to. Yeah.
that was a similar question I asked when I became affirming to our queer friends and neighbors was even when I still had the sort of conservative interpretive scheme, which I don't have now, but
Mhm.
even before I had questioned that, I thought to myself, how would I rather be wrong? Like if I assume I'm going to stand before God one day and give an account for what I believe and what I say, and I assume that I am imperfect, I
Mhm.
believe I'm imperfect. I'm finite. I'm
Right.
sinful. So I'm going to get things wrong. So let's just assume that my beliefs are wrong. How would I rather be wrong? Would I rather be wrong in a way that I know does violence and harm to
Mhm.
other people? Or would I rather be wrong by loving people and
Right.
then standing before God one day and be like, yeah, my bad. I loved too much,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know? So, man, this just sounds like our journeys are so similar.
Yeah. Very.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, do you have somebody? I mean, it doesn't have it can be more recent, like, but do you have somebody you look at in your life and you think, yeah, like that's a person who's spiritually like I want to be like?
Yeah. Tom First.
No.
No, but you're a good one. I was, not, gosh, yeah, not anybody personally, I
Hmm.
guess. I really like Richard Rohr a lot
Yeah. Yep.
because, although, he is Catholic and certainly not fundamentalist how I was raised, but certainly,
Right.
Roman Catholics can be very fundamentalistic, but
Uh-huh.
his views about spirituality and connecting with God beyond these concepts of religion and denomination really appeal to me quite a bit. And personally, I don't think I appreciated it at the time, but I do remember one of my dad's aunts was a lady that grew up in the South, grew up in West Tennessee, but really for her time and place exhibited, she treated Black people in a more than a nice way, in an
Yeah.
equitable way.
Mm.
It just lived out her faith very simply and just was an overly kind person.
Yeah.
And yeah, I always remember her, and I think what strengthened that in my mind too was my dad would at times criticize her because she, her little Methodist church in Lauderdale County, she didn't go every Sunday, and one time they had a woman
She
preacher.
didn't
So
morally
that was
conform.
bad. So,
Yeah.
Aunt Bessie Sue, she's real nice, but I don't know. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's so interesting to me that, like, coming out of this, the fundamentalist, angry Santa Claus
Mhm.
background, that the model of faith that God gave you is a person who also was present in your childhood to some
Mhm.
degree, but
Mhm.
was a gentle and tender
Mhm.
and just exemplar of faith.
Right.
It was
Exactly.
almost like God was before you realize it. I've thought about this with my own stories too. Like
Mhm.
before I realized that there were these little moments or these people that were just on the
Mhm.
fringe of
Mhm.
my life that
Right.
I look back now and I'm like, that was God's way of saying, I see
Mhm.
you. I see that you need something other than what you're surrounded by. And you're
Right.
not going to realize it immediately, but one day you'll see this.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
incredible, man.
Right.
Tim, is there a story from your life that sort of like represents the essence of who Tim Flack is as a
Mhm.
person?
Wow. That's big. Uh,
That's a big question. Yeah,
yeah.
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 And it can be silly, it can be serious, it can
Mhm.
be, traumatic, like whatever you feel like sharing.
Well, I think the story of who I am as a person, it's centered on our kids. It's centered on, at least in my adult life, what we went through with Madeline and how
Yeah.
I've wound up doing the work that I have at Le Bonheur. Prior to that time, I was an attorney and kind of a reluctant one, quite frankly, to tell you the
Uh,
truth. A lot of story there, but coming to this place and having a child that you could have potentially lost because of a medical condition, and then having their lives saved by this place. I mean, that changed my whole trajectory of my career. Bridge and I had done volunteer kind of things before, but to have this as an institution, we really wanted to give back to in a significant way that changed. And in some ways too, I think the more I think about that, really the seeds of where I've come in the stuff that we've been talking about, church happened in those
Hmm.
days because,
Okay.
when you're, as we were often by ourselves sitting in a hospital room and not knowing if your kid's going to make it or not, and sort of, time, it's funny, it's like time stops, and the things you worry about, like what's going on in the news or what the president, all that stuff just goes away. And I think too, also the things foundationally around church kind of also begin to sort of fall away for me, and in a way that I probably didn't, and not probably, I didn't recognize at the time, but were really changing me as a person.
Hmm.
uh, I remember distinctly the night before Madeline's surgery, Bridget and I went to the chapel that was in the basement of Le Bonheur at the time. Of course, Le Bonheur is part of Methodist Le Bonheur Healthcare. And there was a stained glass window of John Wesley, and sitting under that. So yeah, I was being drawn toward Methodism. And praying like, God, we don't know what's going to happen, and you're in control of it. And I remember just having a sense of peace like I'd never had before.
Hmm.
And it changed my life. And I think, again, like I said, those are the seeds of where I've come in my faith too, in church. I had to finally get to the place where I said, you know what? I can't be in charge of it anymore, God. I just, this burden of trying to figure out what's right and who's wrong. And I'm just going to just give it to you and let you handle it. And not in a sense that I'm not going to think about things or anything like that, but just giving over that sort of control, which was a very, very big part of how I grew up. Because it's not just
Yeah.
control, but it's also, that's where, and I think where I have also grown for a long time. When I started this process, I had a lot of anger at the people that I'd grown up with, but I've come to have more of a sense of compassion because I see that really they're just really fearful and scared
They're
people.
afraid.
Yeah, and they're just trying to find a way to control what they can't. And
Yes.
why they create these ideas of God as this wrathful person. So yeah.
Dude, man, it is so refreshing to hear somebody else talk about it like that
Yep.
because I have often articulated it that way. And sometimes I feel like I'm alone.
Hmm.
In there's an element of empathy
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
it takes to look at somebody who abuses somebody else and say, both what you're doing is wrong
Hmm.
and I understand that you're
Hmm.
afraid.
Exactly.
And I love the way you said that fundamentalism is an attempt to be in charge of your faith.
Yes. Yep.
Instead of receiving faith as a gift of God, it is
Exactly.
really an attempt to be in control of it
Hmm.
so that it's really ends up being a gift to yourself, but really it's a curse.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good stuff, Tim. That's profound, man. I'm gonna be thinking about that one for a while. Would you be willing to share with our church what it is about Memphis First that sort of like helps you feel like you can grow in your faith here?
Yeah. Number one, it's an open and affirming church. I love the teaching that goes on there and the ability to learn from others. I've always certainly appreciate your sermons, and been doing Sunday school, meeting with people. It's not just always, just not everybody agrees with me, but being able to talk about things and learn from people in an environment where people really want to learn and they're open to that. And you're not sitting like I have in many, many years of going to Sunday school classes and Bible studies where you're kind of like, well, if I say this, is somebody gonna be really mad at me? And
Right.
I appreciate that. And the other thing that we appreciate and love about the environment, and one of the churches that we landed at is, after my, Tim Keller days, the primary reason it was attractive to us was at the time when it ended up not being that way. But when we first started going there, it was very much like Sunday morning at first. Lots of our friends from the neighborhood, people that were struggling with homelessness, addiction, and they were welcome. And that's something that's always been important to Bridget and I to show to our kids.
Yeah.
Both Bridget and I both grew up in, middle to upper middle class privileged families. We grew up in the suburbs. The churches that we had gone to were everybody looked like us. Everybody had the same skin color. Everybody had the same economic status. So, to be in a place where people are welcome, and not only just that they're welcome to come and sit, but, sometimes folks that are, for instance, dealing with mental health or addiction issues, they might get loud in church or do
Yep.
something that makes folks
Yeah.
uncomfortable. But we're in a place where that's okay. And
Yep.
it's always meant so much to us, and really the example that we want the church we go to look like the kingdom, and not what we're comfortable with maybe sometimes. So
It's so like refreshing to me to hear like somebody articulate that because on the one hand I want people to be able to come in on Sunday morning and worship and like focus on God. On the
mhm,
other hand, I know that there is just a lot happening in our sanctuary
mhm,
on Sunday morning,
right,
and it's everything from somebody falling asleep or somebody who's just there to get
mhm,
coffee
mhm,
to somebody who's having a breakdown of some kind
right,
and or doesn't smell the best or whatever. And
mhm,
I've started saying that when I walk into the sanctuary and it doesn't smell the best, I start saying to myself, this is what the kingdom of heaven smells like, Tom. Like,
mhm,
if you want to be in eternity with God, like, get used to this smell as something that should be celebrated.
right.
Like,
Yeah,
I'm so anyway,
agree.
it's just
Mhm,
really refreshing to
mhm,
hear somebody who's like attracted to that kind of
mhm,
mission that our church has.
right.
So, Tim, one more question. As you have talked about your own deconstruction, your growth, and understanding who God is, when you think about God now, what kinds of images come up?
Yeah, God is just an incredible, loving being.
Yeah.
He or she is it's just indescribable. It's so ironic because that's what I was always told growing up, but I never really understood it.
Because you were
And
told there were conditions on the love. Like
right,
God
right,
is loving, but there are all these
right,
conditions. Yeah.
right. And it's just overwhelmingly amazing.
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
that there is this being that loves all human beings in such a way that we really, and it's true. And again, growing up, you can't do anything to earn your salvation, those kinds of
Right.
things I
Right.
was taught, but it really is true. It doesn't really, it's not really has anything to do with you, and it's just
Yeah.
there, and he
Yeah.
loves you. You don't have to sit around worried that, oh, God, I hope I confessed everything like I should have, or I hope when I asked Jesus in my heart, I was sincere enough because, when I'm
Because
laying
then
on
I
my
gotta be
bed,
more sincere tomorrow
right,
night when I
right,
ask again. Yeah.
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 And along with that, just the sense of just freedom that
Yeah.
brings, that you can live your life and you're not constricted by these sets of rules and those kinds of things. It's just, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know sometimes people think, oh, that's so cliche, but I mean, really, it is. I mean, God is just love, and it's, yeah,
It doesn't have to be
yeah,
complicated, right? I
mm-mm,
think
no,
what I am hearing you say, I'm trying to think, I think maybe it was Buechner or Tillich. I think it was Buechner, but said like that at the end of the day, the true Christian is the person who can accept that they are accepted.
right. That's great. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Well, Tim, I am so grateful for your journey. I
Yeah.
am so grateful to be a small part of it. I am so grateful that our church gets to be a part of it. And thank you for just like
Yeah, thank
blessing
you.
the congregation with this conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me. Appreciate
You
it.
bet. You
Yeah,
bet. Bye. Bye, Tim.
bye.
My vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best thought by day.